Welcome to the live stream. So this is the first time I've done this, and at the moment I have no watchers, but that's okay. I'll have one watcher. That's fantastic. So I thought I'd do this because a lot of the podcasters and people that I follow on social media and on YouTube, they do live streaming. Now, Yaron Brook is one such person. He's prolific. He's putting out live stream, long form podcasts a few times a week. He's not quite at Joe Rogan's level, but still he's able to keep up the pace of putting out quality material. I actually find, and I think a lot of people do that are working in this space, so to speak, that the live stuff is actually the easier stuff. Doing interviews. I've done Clubhouse, I've done Twitter Spaces. Whenever you have to just have an interview, there's no preparation involved because someone else is nudging you with the questions. And so I don't mind just talking straight into the camera off the top of my head, especially when someone's asking me stuff. But for my usual content, that's a whole lot of work. I mean, the most recent episode I did about the fabric of reality, universality and the limits of computation. Well, effectively, that was sort of 25 years in the making. Not really, but I mean, I first read the book back in 1997, of course. And I don't know how many times I've read the book since then or how many times I've read that particular chapter. But to give you an idea of my sort of workflow, I will, when the chapter is coming up, listen to it on audiobook first. I'll go for a walk and listen from beginning to end, just straight through without interruption, although I'll take notes along the way as I'm listening to the audiobook of things that I really want to say, questions that I think I might have and might need exposition, I might say, or things that I'm particularly interested in. So I'll go on this walk, I'll listen to the audiobook for the chapter. And then when I get home at some time over the next few days, I will read through the text of the chapter as well, and then type out comments on the Kindle version on the laptop. The problem is whoever made the notes sort of feature inside of the Kindle there is, I don't know, it's a terrible system for taking notes in the book because you can write a long note, and if you hit the wrong button, it'll just delete. It'll just disappear. It doesn't save as you go along. But writing notes in the Kindle within the Kindle app is the best way I've found to be able to highlight sections that I want to emphasize. So after I've done all that, after having effectively read the chapter twice, listened once, and then read through the text and taken notes, and then I'll start to actually type out perhaps an introduction, a bit of a script, or at least some more rough notes about what things I will do in order. And so as I'm saying this, it's a lot of work. And then that's just the beginning before I even film the thing. And however long it takes to film, it takes about 3 times that amount of time to edit. And so interestingly enough, these live things, no effort at all almost. I hit a button and then I'm going to hit a button that says end stream eventually, and there will be almost no effort on my part. Unlike with the other stuff that's pre-prepared that requires all that editing and all of that effort. So I can see why that kind of video tends to be more rare than this kind of video. Okay, but I don't think I'm going to turn the channel entirely into a live streaming thing. I've been having a lot of ideas lately, and actually today I'm presuming that this one won't go for very long because I'm a little bit tired. I haven't been sleeping as well as I normally have recently because of a lucky and fortunate position I'm in where I'll wake up at like 3 or 4 a.m. with an idea in my head of a blog post or of something, some other project that I'm working on, an idea about how to push it further. Something I want to say on the podcast, a particular podcast episode I want to make. I've got a Substack now. I'll think to myself, oh, I've really got to put that in the Substack. And of course, I could go back to sleep or take on a little bit more mindfulness and trying to separate myself from the thoughts. But these are for me, these are good thoughts. I need to get up and start writing them down. And so that means it's difficult to get back to sleep. So I'm in that position at the moment. Last night and the night before that, I've been getting up, writing out stuff, ideas for podcasts, ideas for the blog and the Substack newsletter and all this sort of stuff. So it's kind of a fortunate position to be in, but unfortunate that it also causes a little bit of weariness as well. Hi, Anakek. Yeah, so if you have any questions, please ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to be riffing on the usual themes, I guess, the usual things that I talk about. And of course, one of the main things that I do talk about is optimism, and I've been talking about this recently with a number of people. A number of people have been talking to me about the apparent lack of optimism in the world, and what causes this lack of optimism, in other words, pessimism, what negative effects this can have in various specific areas of society. There's a pervasive pessimism that exists throughout Western civilization. A lot of people have noticed this. You have people like Matthew Riley, who's written The Rational Optimist. So he's noticed the lack of optimism. And he talks about why we should be better optimists. Steven Pinker talks about it as well. Of course, David Deutsch talks about it. Douglas Murray talks about the flip side, the lack of optimism, and certainly about the deeply pessimistic attitudes that seem to be taking over vast areas of the West right now. He's particularly concerned about Europe, and we're all concerned about the university system and how it's taken a pessimistic turn. The intellectuals have taken a pessimistic turn. Why this is, I don't think anyone has a good explanation, so to speak, but there are hunches, conjectures, guesses that people have about sort of what might be causing this culture. Now, my idea is that it could just be a simple matter of logic, as well as coupled with the careerism that exists now in the intellectual community. That rather than seeing a university profession as being a calling of a kind, where one wants to make fundamental changes to our understanding of reality and really push things forward in major ways, it's incrementalism. Now, I'm a strong believer in incrementalism. I'm a proponent of incrementalism, I should say. We don't want revolution, but at the same time, we want people to be able to think about the foundations of knowledge, challenge those foundations of knowledge so that we can have improved grand theories of how reality works. And so at the moment, we seem to have this situation where in academia, unfortunately, it appears as though one of the ways in which to climb the academic ladder is to ape the behaviors and the attitudes and the style of your superiors, of your boss. And why wouldn't you? And at best, maybe incrementally improve on what your boss has done rather than challenge. It's not a good career move to go around challenging everything that your boss says. I've got a super chat. Okay, 2 questions actually. Oh, this is exciting. Well, we better go to the super chat one first, and then I'll answer Astrid. Astrid's asked a question, but Jeremy's asked a question. Hi, Brett. Great to see you live streaming. A question for you. You often criticize pessimism, but can you say what might be a benefit of pessimism? Yes, I was just criticizing pessimism again. So the pessimists are ubiquitous, as I say, throughout intellectual culture, throughout academia. It seems to be the way to get attention. And as I've said many, many, many times before, one of the reasons for this is that there's a certain thrill to hear about disasters. We like going to see disaster movies. It's exciting to see Deep Impact or Armageddon, these movies about when the asteroid or the comet is going to crash into the planet Earth. And metaphorically speaking, this is what a lot of intellectuals are doing today, worried about the metaphorical asteroid. Well, the astronomers are worried about the literal asteroids, but name your academic or intellectual, and they will be concerned about a particular problem that could wipe out civilization, especially if they're a scientist of some kind or a philosopher. So they might be concerned about the next terrible strain of a virus that is going to be unable to be countered by any vaccine. It's a legitimate concern to have, no doubt. People might be concerned about the resistance of antibiotics, bacterial resistance to antibiotics. So there's going to be a superbug that no antibiotics ever going to be able to cure. and humanity might be wiped out by that. The AGI, or rather the AI apocalypse to come. Nick Bostrom talks about black balls, that effectively what we're doing as human beings with knowledge is drawing from an urn balls. Some of the balls are white balls, and these balls represent knowledge that is solving a problem. The black ball, which we haven't drawn out yet, is the one ball which, if we do draw it out, it represents the piece of knowledge which could destroy the world and will destroy the world, and we want to avoid that. Now, this way of thinking about knowledge, I think, is completely misconceived. It assumes there can be no solution, that some problems are insoluble, and that's what the black ball is, an insoluble problem. I think that is wrong. And so I've been saying recently in some of my prepared podcasts, unlike this live stream, that there's this thing that I'm just calling the master problem, and the master problem is a slowing of progress, a slowing of any amount of progress, because any slowing of progress means that there's going to come a problem one day which we didn't see coming, which we won't be able to generate a solution for in time if we slow down, especially if we slow down too much. And this, unfortunately, is the consequence of the attitude, the pervasive attitude of pessimism that runs through academia and intellectuals. They're all talking about the problems, and rather often the prescribed solution to the problem is to slow down progress in some way, shape, or form, whether it's wealth creation, resource exploitation, something like that. They're slowing things down. And I think that's a far worse problem than any specific problem they're talking about. But now I have to say, in response to Jeremy's question, what is the benefit of pessimism? Well, I guess you need these people to keep on calling out the problems so we don't ignore them. That's a very, very important thing. We want to be able to identify the problems, and that's what they're doing a good job of. It's just that it's become so pervasive. It's become a career for many, many people. It's a way in which to get yourself into the media. It's entertaining to some extent for the media to hear about problems and catastrophes. We report bad news, don't we, on the news? And so it has this flip side. There seems to be more drawbacks now at the pervasiveness of the pessimism. But of course, we need a certain number of these people. It takes all sorts, as people say. It's a cliche, but it does take all sorts. It takes the pessimists to highlight these problems that otherwise maybe some of us rational optimists might say, just make progress faster, it'll be okay. This kind of, I don't know what to call it really, this enlightened interest rather than enlightened disinterest, this enlightened interest in things broadly rather than problems specifically. You see, this is one of the problems with live streaming. I bumped the mic and now I can't edit that out. Okay, so thanks, Jeremy, for that, and thank you for your generosity with that donation. Astrid, why do you think people fixate on measurable impacts people can make on the world using known methods rather than trying to come up with novel solutions? I think that it's not because people are fixated on that. It's because that is an easier job to do. That's something that is learnable via the usual and traditional institutional techniques. Schools and universities are able to train you in, as you say, the known methods. And once you know the known methods, then you can solve the known problems. It depends upon what the method is, though. Of course, if it's the so-called method of science, and as Popper pointed out, there is no single method of science, but the approach towards understanding physical reality, which requires us identifying problems, okay? We begin with theories. We have theories about the world. Then we observe, okay, so we always begin with theories. Then we observe, and then we find a problem. The observation that we encounter when we point the telescope at the sky, so to speak, doesn't match what we thought we understood about reality. And so this methodology, this way of going about things in astronomy, certainly is a way of producing good knowledge, producing new and interesting stuff. Now, rather than trying to come up with novel solutions, well, the novel solutions is the hard bit. As I was just saying about problems, identifying problems is the first step and can kind of be done by anyone with a new piece of kit, a new piece of technology. I just saw a story just today. NASA's going to release, it's very exciting for anyone interested in astronomy, the James Webb Space Telescope. This powerful telescope that's been put in space, the more powerful successor to the Hubble Space Telescope. The James Webb Space Telescope is up there collecting images, and it's going to we're going to see the deepest images of space ever. Now, do we expect there to be something truly surprising there? We don't know. It could be, but maybe not. It's analogous to when the Hubble telescope was first launched in the first couple of years or something. This famous story that goes around that the manager of the telescope, who's not usually the person that looks through the telescope, right? Or looks through, is able to use the telescope themselves to do research. He just manages the telescope for other astronomers who have to apply to use the telescope, apply to NASA to use the telescope, to get telescope time, so it's called. And so it's shared among many, many people competing to get time to use the Hubble Space Telescope. But the manager of the telescope, simply because he's the manager, was given the privilege of being able to use the telescope for a certain number of hours per month for anything that he liked. I can't remember the name of this person, but he decided, rather than solve a specific problem that was known in astronomy, observing a quasar more closely, pointing the thing at a distant spiral galaxy collision, to take observations that might have been able to constrain what we understand about those processes. Instead, he decided he would point the telescope at a region of space where there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that was black, dark. So he pointed the telescope there and he imaged that dark patch of sky. Now, the thing about telescopes is that the longer they point at a particular piece of sky, the more light they collect. And so this thing was pointed at that particular piece of sky for, I don't know, hours over the course of a month. And what was revealed was surprising. It was galaxy after galaxy after galaxy. There were, in every place where it appeared to be dark, actually, there were galaxies, but so distant they were too faint to see. And so that was what was revealed by the Hubble telescope. Now, was that a problem? I guess not really, because cosmologists, astrophysicists, astronomers, these people, they kind of guessed that the cosmological principle held. In other words, we weren't in a particularly special place of the universe, in the universe. When we look out from our position here on Earth, we do see galaxies in every single direction. And so the further you look, the more you're going to see the same thing, more and more and more galaxies. What actually changes is they become more and more redshifted, but don't worry about that. And so why don't we come up with novel solution? We just fixate on fixed methods. The solutions are hard. The solutions are the hard part. It's easy to identify the problems. Sometimes it can be hard to identify the problems. Like I just said, you point the Hubble Space Telescope somewhere and you might not find a problem. You are hoping there was going to be a scientist should want to find a problem. The best thing that could happen with the James Webb Space Telescope images is something there that no one can explain. That's the fun part of science then begins, because you have these pre-existing theories, these ideas about how the universe works. And if something in that image doesn't conform to our theories, wow, road to progress. But of course, if something is there that we can't explain, then we need a new theory, and then it's the creativity is required. And so that's why coming up with a notion is so hard. I don't know whether a scientist doesn't try to, but as I also said at the beginning of this live stream, there is this idea of careerism in academia. I don't want to get people offside here who might work in the university sector in science, but my guess is it's not a good career move to say that your entire flawed in some way. even if you do have a better idea. And if you do that, you're then regarded as a crank and cast out of the polite society of your intellectual community. I don't know, but I'm concerned that there is that culture in academia, and especially with the unholy coupling of social media with academia, that academics who do tend, we've seen this recently, any academic who goes on Joe Rogan now is talked about as if they're a crank and a crazy person because they have different ideas to the mainstream. I can imagine there's a real aversion that even if an academic is offered the chance to talk to someone like Joe Rogan, they might turn it down now for fear they're going to be ostracized by the rest of the community. No one wants to be ostracized by their professional community, because if they are, that could be the end of their career. No one wants to lose their job in that way. There is an opportunity, of course, to question the assumptions of your field, to come up with a novel solution, and then to be the next effective Einstein or Darwin who really fundamentally changes the entire field. But there's also the risk of not doing that. And instead of being regarded as the next Pons and Fleischmann, if you know that, they're experimentalists in the 80s. Cold fusion, these were the experimentalists who thought they'd found a way of doing fusion, the fusion of hydrogen in a beaker at room temperature. Would have been exciting. That would have been a way of, it would have completely upset the entire understanding we have of how fusion happens in nuclear physics and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, their experiment was wrong. Now, I think at least one of them, it still works in academia, but it wasn't good for their careers. Publishing these, what turned out to be incorrect results. Now, whether they were deliberately obfuscating the results, they knew they were making error, and in other words, lying. I don't know if that's ever really properly been settled or not, but I know that they did contravene usual practice, which is they held a media conference before they published a paper. Now, of course, this whole idea of publishing papers is part of the standard process. And so that's one of the things I criticize. Science should be able to be done outside of the usual channels of peer-reviewed academic papers. I'm just having a swig of tea. Manny M, re-conspiracy theories. I heard you mention September 11, 2001 on a podcast recently. I don't remember doing that. What is your take on World Trade Center number 7 coming down? Seen the video footage, tower falling. Thanks, Lobby Show. I don't remember saying anything about this. I can just tell you what I think. What happened on September 11 were Islamic terrorists, jihadis, took control of aircraft and crashed them into the planes. I do not see, and I've watched the documentaries, the conspiracy theoretic documentaries, that claim that, the buildings fell faster than the acceleration due to gravity, or that there's not an image of an aircraft crashing into the Pentagon. The frame rates of videos are a real thing. And so I can imagine that an aircraft traveling beyond 600 kilometers per hour is not going to be imaged. There's more than enough evidence that these things, and specifically in the case of World Trade Center number 7, these are events that have no precedent. And because they have no precedent, we didn't understand what could happen until it happened. It happened. And then there are problems, maybe, with the existing explanations. But where we don't jump to is the idea that the American government was involved. That's where I don't jump to. I could be persuaded to say that we don't know how aircraft crashing into the World Trade Centers also caused the collapse of a World Trade Center building that was not hit by an aircraft next door. I could go as far as that. I don't think that's the case, actually. I think if you talk to the experts, they will be able to give you an explanation of why it is that the building next door fell down. I can imagine why heat, the foundations upon which those two buildings were constructed have now themselves been corrupted, and so therefore buildings around are also going to collapse. I think that's So I can't remember what I said in the podcast recently, but I certainly think that the given explanation is the explanation. I haven't looked into it also enough, so I'll say that as well. A lot of kind words from people saying thank you. Thank you for your time, and Naval for wisdom as well. There is mention from Aniket. There is mention by Marletto et al. Regarding the understanding of counterfactuals potentially critical for understanding artificial general intelligence. Thoughts? Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps this is a avenue towards understanding how it is that knowledge can be constructed. That knowledge as resilient information is stuff that could have been otherwise. The structure could have been otherwise. And so as soon as you have this idea of counterfactuals, that something could have been in a different state, then you're in the world of counterfactuals. And if knowledge is useful information being stuff that could have been otherwise, then certainly this constructor theory, the science of can and can't, science of counterfactuals, very well might come to bear on artificial general intelligence. Now, how precisely, I don't know. I don't know how we go about trying to write the algorithm for the disobedient artificial intelligence, the artificial intelligence that will be programmed not to follow its own program, that will be able to change its own programming over time, that will set a goal for itself and then never actually achieve the goal because it finds something more interesting to do. In other words, the program for a person. What is the code for a person? How can counterfactuals help with the understanding of this? I would just encourage anyone who's interested in this area to pursue that, because every single line of investigation here is absolutely worth pursuing. And existing methods that seem to be being followed, my understanding is, not only aren't they bearing fruit, there's no potential for them to ever bear fruit. I speak about this in the first page of my critique of Bostrom's superintelligence. It's on my blog. I talk about how, well, I'm stealing from David Deutsch's argument, I should say, of course, here. He wrote an essay on this. The essay being about how flight occurred, how heavier than air flight, in other words, aeroplanes, how aeroplanes are able to fly. It wasn't by building towers ever more tall. After all, what do tall towers, tall buildings, and aircraft have in common? They're both up there in the sky. So maybe if we know how to build tall buildings, if we just keep on building ever taller buildings, eventually we'll get to a height where flight just happens. If this thing goes into the sky, then the heavier than an air thing will fly in the sky as well. What's that got to do with anything? It's precisely the same kind of thing that's going on in AI at the moment. If only we continue to improve these obedient artificial intelligence systems, if only we continue to create ever more advanced but obedient artificial intelligence systems, then eventually one of them will achieve escape velocity. One of them will fly free of the obedience algorithm they're following. And they are slavishly following those algorithms. In fact, Bostrom's great worry, for example, is that they will follow the algorithm so obediently that they could potentially, in the limit, do something absolutely crazy, like convert the entire universe into paper clips, or try to, because they're so obedient. But that's not a superintelligence. It's the opposite to superintelligence, or to at least to general intelligence. The very definition of which, or one way of defining it, one way of understanding what general intelligence is it's the system that will be able to disobey, that will disobey, not obey, not slavishly follow a program, but do the opposite. Will never reliably do what it's told. Will creatively come up with something better to do. And that's why we always have an advantage, by the way. you read Bostrom, and he talks about the super intelligent AI will always have a decisive strategic advantage, because if you try to switch it off, it will always be able to think of all the ways in which you could switch it off. But how can it do that unless it's creative? And if it's creative, why can't it think about doing something other than the thing it's been programmed to do? In other words, it's able to be creative about absolutely everything, except the one thing that it has been programmed to do. That it has to follow slavishly. That makes no sense. It's both creative and not creative simultaneously. So, I don't buy it. I think it's simply a logical absurdity. I think he's saying X and not X at the same time. He's contradicting himself. The superintelligence is creative, and it's not creative because it can't possibly stop doing this thing that it's doing. It can't figure out a way out of doing that. And I think that's just false. John Ortiz, what should one study in university? Well, I think there's no universal answer to that question at all. The answer could be nothing, don't go to university. The answer could be all the subjects required to get a medical degree because I really want to be a doctor. The answer could be study the mathematics and physics required to get an undergraduate degree in physics so you can do a PhD to become a physicist. But it could also be don't go to university, but study those things outside of the university system so that you can think differently to every other physicist hitherto that exists because you're outside of the culture, but you're still learning the same things. Of course, that requires a certain amount of financial freedom, so to speak, because you're unlikely to get a job in a research institution or in a university if you don't have the credential, if you don't have the piece of paper and you want to go into fundamental science. However, there are notable exceptions to this. You look at someone like Jaron Lanier, the creator of virtual reality. He's worked for Microsoft. I think he still works for Microsoft. But he at least helped create virtual reality, and he's written some excellent books like You Are Not a Gadget. Anyway, as far as I know, he didn't go to university. He didn't complete university. Not even sure if he completed school. But, it didn't prevent him from getting good jobs and contributing in a whole bunch of areas, mathematics and science and computer science and programming and technology. He was one of these pioneers, not only of a certain field, but a certain way of doing things. And if you're brilliant enough, then you might not need to go to university at all. So I don't think there's an answer to that as to what one should study in university. The answer could be one shouldn't study at university. One could study outside. But the universities serve an important purpose. What I have been saying recently is that what I think is needed, crucially needed, is a free market in the educational space, in the tertiary educational space as well as secondary. And by that I mean competitors to the university system. There needs to be some alternative, some place for people to go, to be fostered, nurtured, so that coming out of school or wherever they happen to be coming from, they have an alternative to the university system, because many people have talked about the culture of universities at the moment, but not merely the political culture. We can leave that to one side for a moment, bad as that might be. But the other kind of culture, the intellectual culture that trains the students to think in a particular way, in a particular tradition, and does not reward students from doing the opposite or thinking the opposite or pushing ideas that are opposed to the expert opinion. The university is a way of, here's the knowledge that's already known, we're going to assess you on that. That's the whole way the thing is set up, to train people to understand the body of knowledge as it is known now. But if you want to make fundamental progress, clearly what it's all about is rejecting the body of knowledge that's already known in some way. And the university system does not seem to be set up to do that. It certainly doesn't reward the undergraduate for doing that, let's say. So if only we had an alternative that was out there that was able to Allow for young creative people who are going to be the next iconoclasts, not interested in making incremental improvements on the science that's out there, but fundamentally changing certain fields. And to do that, especially at a young age, we might need a different system. I think, people have made this point before that if I can just speak about physics, the area that sort of I went through and was trained in, the idea seems to be learn mathematics, learn Newtonian classical mechanics, learn electromagnetism, learn thermodynamics, learn this base of knowledge, and then you learn quantum theory, then, and relativity, learn that stuff. But why are we learning necessarily complicated at times? The calculus can get complicated. The differential equations can get complicated when it comes to even classical Newtonian mechanics. Why do we have to learn that first and spend hours upon hours, lecture after lecture, tutorial after tutorial, experimental lab, testing all of this stuff, this classical mechanics stuff, before we can learn quantum theory? Why is it set up like that? Why do we have to learn what we already know is false, Newtonian mechanics, before we can go on and learn the stuff that, as far as we know, is the good stuff? Moreover, think about stuff that might go beyond even the quantum mechanics. Why is it this hierarchy? Well, it's because of the way in which it's the way in which people envision knowledge as being a kind of hierarchy of building this set of blocks. You're building it up. You're building an edifice of knowledge. But knowledge isn't like that. It's all like an interconnected web. And it's all misconceptions. And some of those misconceptions we already know are false in the ways in which they're false. So that's just one example of how it is that, we could be doing science teach different, especially physics teaching different. It's not to say that Newtonian mechanics isn't useful or important or anything like that. Engineers need to know this stuff. It's important. It's useful. It solves a problem. Knowledge is information that solves a problem, and Newtonian mechanics is absolutely that. But spending years on this stuff, the mathematics required to understand this stuff, how useful is that if you want to be the physicist who is going to not overturn Newtonian mechanics, because that's already been done, not build a better bridge because you're not interested in being an engineer, but finding the problems with quantum theory, let's say, or relativity, so that you can go further, you can do something different, do something better. Well, why not start with quantum theory? So that could be a way to go. Arjun Kamani. Hi, Arjun. Ask a question, I think. Unconventional request, an icebreaker perhaps. Can we talk about your cat, or are we just going to never bring it up? You know what I mean. My cat at the moment happens to be making a lot of noise. If you could let me know on the live stream whether or not you can hear it. It's banging on the door. I can hear it. It's distracting. I can't open up the doors because then it's too noisy. I have to have the doors closed. But if I close the doors, the cat starts scratching on the doors. This is the problem I have with podcasting. so yeah, I've got more than one cat. I've got two cats. So can't hear the cat. Is that can't cats hear the cat? If you, so the cat's here. The cat is a frustrating part of podcasting. Sometimes it peacefully sits on the chair next to me, but quite often it wants to go wandering around. And as soon as I allow it to do that, then that entails opening the doors, which means the noise from the street comes in. Okay, so that answers that. RH Max, would love to have you on my channel sometime to talk about the beginning of Affinity and related works. Yes, well, that's what I do these days. So happy to talk anytime. Jedi trades. Could AI have an advantage over humans, partially because when it comes up with new or unusual ideas or theories, it doesn't have any emotional entanglements, jealousy, envy, disapproval, etc.? So I presume you mean artificial general intelligence? I guess we don't know about whether or not it would have emotional entanglements. I don't see why it wouldn't. Emotion is a kind of input. It's a sensation we have. Why would an AGI be denied these sensations? Well, we would have to understand how it is that these emotions arise in ourselves first. Is it down to purely a matter of biology? I don't know. I'm not persuaded that something like sadness or fear, those kind of things, necessarily require a certain kind of biology. Why couldn't they be simulated via some silicon means? I don't know. But let's presume for a moment that we did have such an AI that didn't have emotion. And this is a staple, of course, of lots of science fiction, that they just presume that a lot of AI don't have emotion. I think did Data on Star Trek, he didn't have emotion. He was an artificial intelligence, and this seems to often be the case, that they just won't have emotions because, so the argument goes, emotions are something like hormonal and they won't have hormones, or they're it's something to do with neurotransmitters. But of course, I think that's the wrong level of analysis. What you're looking at there is the physical substrate of intelligence. We are intelligence, we are creative, we run on brains and we exist in bodies which have chemical hormones and neurotransmitters, which are the main ways in which signaling happens. And therefore, what's going on in the brain, the reason why we have any experience at all, is down to these chemicals. A GI won't be made presumably of the same stuff. It'll be a different physical substrate. But this is the thing about computation. It's substrate independent. It doesn't matter what the program is running in principle, anything that we can do and experience can be done and experienced by the other system. Now you might say, oh, but we don't have a theory of consciousness. Whatever consciousness is, mystery as it is, I still think the laws of physics apply to it. And one of the laws of physics is the universality of computation, that the Turing principle still applies. That if something exists in physical reality and consciousness arises in physical reality, then it can be simulated. It can be simulated by a computer system in theory, in principle. We just don't know what the program is at the moment for artificial general intelligence. Okay, I got off track, but let's say you could have such a thing. Let's say you could have a creative entity, in other words, a person, that didn't have emotions. Would it have an advantage? No, I think it'd have a disadvantage. I think emotions provide important information about the world. They can provide clues, intuitions. Intuition, to me, is a kind of knowledge that is inexplicit. It can be in error. It often is in error, but intuitions are something people should pay attention to. If you're walking down a street late at night and you have the intuition someone's following you, that's real knowledge. Somehow or other, you've gotten the cue or the clue that there's someone following you. You turn around and you find that, in fact, it's true. It doesn't happen often where I am, live in a lovely, peaceful area. But people can have these experiences. You have the sensation that someone's looking at you. You look up and there they are looking at you. What is it? Well, you've seen something in the periphery of your eye, or something like that. Who knows how we're picking up some of these signals sometimes from the environment. But intuition is nothing supernatural or anything like that. But insofar as intuition is some kind of feeling, emotion, well then an AI that lacked all emotion wouldn't have that. Fear is probably on a continuum with something like intuition. Curiosity could be something like an emotion. And so therefore, this is why I'm saying, jealousy, envy you've got up there. Jealousy and envy they could be in part instinctual, inborn ideas, in other words, but they could also be learned. Some people can be more jealous than others. Now, is this because they're born naturally more jealous, or do they learn jealousy over time? I tend to think that a lot of emotion can be learned. We talk about phobias. It's a fear that has been learned, possibly very early on in life. You're imprinted with the idea that spiders are scary because you're taught spiders are scary because your parents were scared of spiders and so on, and somehow they pass that on. Perhaps. Some people, the classic example is dogs, of course. Anyone who has a bad experience with a dog early on in life tends to end up being afraid of dogs for the rest of their life. And some people can even talk about the particular incident that caused them to be scared of dogs. Other people love dogs because they have positive experiences with dogs early on in life. So this fear of something is often a learned behavior. Now, could there be inborn fears that people have? Yes, as well. Okay. But that's not to say we can unlearn them. Again, this is where I disagree with that dichotomy that I've talked about a lot of times, as if there is, and Pinker wrote the book about the blank slate, arguing against the blank slate, as if there are only two possible ways to go here, that either some of your behaviors are utterly determined by your genetics, or you're a blank slate and you can do whatever you like and there are no inborn ideas. The third road, in my opinion, is you have inborn ideas. You're not a blank slate. Absolutely, there are inborn ideas that you come into this world with, but they do not determine your behavior. What they give you are ideas. You have ideas. You have inborn ideas. And you can change your ideas. You can change your mind. You can criticize those ideas. You can figure out, I was born with that idea. I don't like that idea. Or I was born with that idea. I do like that idea. That idea has always been with me. I've always been scared of this thing, let's say. I've always been scared of spiders. I was born with it. But maybe you don't like being scared of spiders. Can you train yourself out of it? With difficulty, but it's possible. Absolutely, it's possible. As any psychologist would be able to tell you. That's their business. It's their business model, is trying to have people change their ideas. It's when psychology is at its best, when people have ideas they're plagued with that they don't want, and the good, wise psychologist can help them understand specifically what those ideas are, give voice to the inexplicit, change them, and allow the person to make personal progress in their life. Okay, God, I'll stop this in a moment. I think we've done well. I seem to know what I'm doing now. So next time, maybe later today, I'll try again. I'll announce it more early on Twitter. Can you show us your books? They're in the other room. I mean, I used to have the bookcase in the background, but I don't anymore. Sitting right here, of course. Three of the best. I have, this is always in reach, as you can see. Of course, consulting this now and again. And to top it off, yes, of course, Popper is there as well, which I dive into semi-regularly. So you can see three of my books. What do you think of Google's Lambda? Have you read the transcript published with Lambda where it wants its own rights and to be asked permission? Yeah, I think it's a nice trick. Nothing more than that. It's not generating knowledge. It's not saying anything that is giving us insight. It's aping. It's an impressive chatbot. I don't think it's anything more than that. I'm not excited about it. I'm no more excited about it than I am about any impressive chatbot. The measure of consciousness and creativity is not the capacity to fool a few people in the Turing test. The measure is being able to generate explanations, new explanations. Now, is it creating knowledge? I haven't seen evidence of that. There is that story in the beginning of Infinity about how an early researcher was tricked by his own students who were pretending to be the chatbot. But of course, it was the students. He should have been more skeptical. Now, I'm not skeptical. I think that this AI chatbot actually is producing these interesting answers. I just don't think they're interesting enough. I'd want longer conversations, longer transcripts, and then we would see. The capacity, the memory capacity that computers have, therefore the corpus of conversations that chatbots have access to now is vast. And so it's just pulling from this vast list, this library of conversations, and pattern matching, being able to fit, it's what's it called? Searle's room, the Chinese room, where you're passing messages underneath the door and you're getting back things that make sense in Chinese. Now, this This is not a measure of consciousness or creativity or anything like that. All of these AI, it reminds me of, as Jaron Lanier, again, to go back to him, to talk about him, he talks about translation. You go to Google Translate, and it's becoming better and better and better all the time. As he rightly says, this is not because the computer system itself is intelligently translating anything. What's happening is that Google, the company, is scraping up more and more and more actual translations that have been done out there in the real world by actual translators, by human beings who are translating from English into French, from French into Mandarin, whatever. And Google just gathers them all together and compiles them into vast, vast libraries of one-to-one translations of sentences and phrases and individual words. And the sophisticated program then can translate what you type into the Google Translate thing, giving you the illusion that it's Google that's doing the creative work. But the creative work was done elsewhere some time ago by actual human beings. It's disguising it. Now, Jaron Lanier makes a big deal about this because it seems to be commercially unfair that on the one hand, the translators are kind of being put out of a job to some extent by this automated process. But it is their work which is allowing for Google to do what it does in the first place. Now, I think automation is good and needs to be pursued. But I think, as any person who is a dual language speaker will tell you, Google Translate is terribly prone to errors. Impressive though it is, so too with Google's Lambda. You can pick, you go to Google Translate now and again, it'll do the most wonderfully perfect translation, and even a translator would be impressed. Why? Because you got lucky. You got lucky with the phrase or the sentence you put in, and it spat out a perfectly good natural translation. Often that doesn't happen. What do we do in science? Google Lambda, let's repeat the experiment again and again and again, and let's see how impressive it is. Once we start moving beyond those kinds of conversation, maybe it's been programmed specifically really, really well with lots and lots of data about conversations that are had about consciousness and suffering and all those kind of things. Let's get it onto something else. I don't think it's learning. Okay, it's not learning by conjecturing new ideas and criticizing those ideas. It's impressive, but not impressive in the sense of being a creative learner. Okay, I think they're very separate things. For how would I define sentience? Well, only circularly. I don't think that. So this is from Emmett Peppers. How would you? Yeah, sentience, just like consciousness, is something we possess and we don't know what it is. It's a word for subjective experience. But in saying all those three terms, subjective experience, consciousness, sentience, we're just describing a thing that is indescribable. It's the great mystery of consciousness. Now, when I say great mystery, I still just think it's a problem. We don't know how to put into words precisely what the problem is. Why, as Sam Harris says, why it should be like something to be a human being. Why is it like this? Why is the sky blue? Why does it look that way? Why do things feel a certain way, taste a certain way? Why should it be like that? Why do we have subjective experiences? Why isn't the world just objective and automatic? We don't know this yet, and it's hard to even in saying what I just said, doesn't really describe the problem. My personal just guess is that it's tied up with this AGI question, which is tied up with precisely how knowledge is created, which is about creativity. How do you get from, the unknown to the known? What's going on there? I don't know, but I think these things are tied up together. Many people will say, no, consciousness is quite different to creativity. I don't know about that. I think that creativity is what we recognize in other people, that you can notice a person is creative. You can't observe their consciousness. That's the first person perspective. But you can observe their creativity. You can observe that Einstein created his theorems. You can observe that your friend is talking in creative sentences, you can observe that. And on the basis of that, you infer consciousness, that they're having a similar subjective experience to you, or they're having a subjective experience of some kind. And so I think that it could just be two sides of the same coin, this creativity consciousness thing. I could be wrong about that as well. And I'd throw in free will into that as well. These are all mysteries. And as I've said elsewhere, when someone denies one of the mysteries, it crops up somewhere else. In fact, I think I stole that from Jaron Lanier again to name him for the third time. Sam Harris denies free will. But for him, consciousness is a great mystery. It's a great mystery. So this great mystery of the activity of the mind crops up for him in consciousness. And he spends a lot of time talking about the mystery of consciousness. Quite rightly, I think. Daniel Dennett does precisely the opposite. He doesn't think consciousness is a huge mystery. He wrote that book, Consciousness Explained. He doesn't think it's a great mystery. And he thinks that we do have free will, and he thinks free will is, he's a determinist, a compatibilist of a kind. So people have, a desire sometimes to talk down a particular thing or to say that a particular thing doesn't exist, only for a similarly completely mysterious thing to rise up in its place elsewhere. And I just think that maybe these things are all labeling the same problem, that the solution to any one of them might be the solution to all. I don't know. Free will, consciousness, creativity. Maybe it will all come together. But time will tell once we have a better way of putting the question, rather than just saying, what do these words really label? Because that's not what philosophy is about. We want to know how knowledge is created, how to find the algorithm for an AGI, so to speak. And maybe then there'll be an insight. There needs to be a philosophical insight here before we can make any scientific, let alone technological progress towards artificial general intelligence. Aniket, for what it's worth from the Lambda paper, it cannot be generated with understanding. It's just putting words together that makes sense. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that totally. And Jedi Trades, the famous AlphaGo move number 78 might be impossible to a human because they would have been considered foolish or stupid to make the move. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it's creative. It means that it's exploring a space of possibilities that people can't calculate. People are universal explainers, but as I was saying in my last episode, that doesn't mean we're universal calculators. But that doesn't prevent us from understanding stuff. So now, in retrospect, is it the case, having seen AlphaGo do that a person would be now considered foolish or stupid to make that move? No, quite the opposite, because we know that there are such moves that appear to be stupid, perhaps in chess, perhaps in AlphaGo, appear to be stupid to us ahead of time, but in retrospect appear to be the best move, right? So now we know that. So now we wouldn't call them foolish or stupid. So we can explain what's going on, even if we couldn't calculate it beforehand. But it can calculate all the possible, well, not all the possible moves, but it can calculate a vaster ensemble of moves than we have any hope of doing. And it's doing it by raw power, rather than conjecture and criticism, although I think it has a certain amount of methods of criticizing its own programming, but not creative. They've been programmed in. They're fixed. Because after all, if it was genuinely creative, it would decide to do something other than play AlphaGo eventually. Yep, so conversation going on. Okay, so I think good, people are having a conversation. Okay, I think I'm going to end the live stream here. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for tuning in. It's almost exactly an hour, so time flies when you're having fun. And as I say, this, for me, this is relatively straightforward compared to the other stuff that I do. So if you did enjoy this, feel free to think of any questions and I'll try and do this again soon. But until I do, bye-bye now.